So, folks, there is a lady named Anna Kasparian, and she has been doing kind of her final goodbyes in the realm of progressivism and left-leaning politics. And I guess her swan song as she exits this particular stage of her life. Her final stop was the Blaze TV, where she went on a show called 0 Hour, which I had never heard of before. But it caught my eye when I saw that she was on an episode titled "I'm Done with the Democratic Party," which, I don't know, in 2025, that reads to me kind of like a "Why I Left the Left." Maybe we're gonna get some high level ideas out of this particular video. Let's take a little bit of a look-see. Let's take a gander. Let's see how this goes.
I'm James Polis. This is 0 Hour.
Oh, that is too fast now.
She's the host of The Young Turks, a fearless commentator and a woman who can debate circles around just about anyone. Buckle up. This conversation is going to be as sharp as her takes. Welcome, Anna Kasparian.
Thank you, James.
How are you?
So good. So good to be here with you. I mean, I've known you forever.
It's crazy, right?
I know.
Yeah. Fash wave. The Blaze TV. They gotta be palatable to the youth.
I knew you back in the day when you were with Pajamas Media, I think it was.
This is ancient history.
Yes.
They've thawed me out from cold storage. No, I remember getting the call or the email, I guess, from Cenk, who was on not that long ago. And he was like, hey.
Also, again, just in case anyone's wondering what Pajama Media is, or PJ Media, it's a conservative media company. It's a conservative media company that was created by a billionaire. So just in case anyone's, curious about that, that's
she can debate circles around anyone because her arguments never go anywhere.
Bada bing, bada boom. As What If Old Hist would say, it is closed loop thinking.
Hey, Glenn Greenwald says that you should come on. And if we had only known, I think that was even before the whole Snowden thing.
Oh, yeah.
And just...
It was such a long time ago. And I just remember, you've always been to the right of me, but I just remember enjoying hearing you engage in conversation. You just seem like a totally reasonable guy. And then I didn't hear from you for a while. So it's kind of nice to see that you're doing your show, you're doing your thing. It's great.
Yeah. Well, you have to be water to swim in media. And it's been a crazy ride, sort of being MAGA before there was such a thing as MAGA, and being well, wait a minute, what about this quadrant on the map? Why are there so many people here, but none of them seem to have any sort of influence or say over what's going on? So, you guys were sort of coming at Obama from the left at that time, but the left was wait a minute, centralizing everything is bad, corporations eating America is bad, undeclared wars are bad, let's not have a permanent surveillance state. All these things that were considered, to the left of Brock.
Yeah, look, if you have to call yourself MAGA before MAGA, you're really conservative. Okay, I know that that's not a huge insight here, but I just want all of our cards to be on the table here. This guy works for the Blaze TV. He works for a conservative propaganda outfit.
Obama, who's this crazy liberal, are now sort of seen, as being sort of right-coded, which is fascinating, is one word for it, right?
I've been thinking about this a lot because, I'm not happy about it. And so I find myself in this weird, politically homeless place right now because you look at the Democratic Party.
Can we just like really take a moment here? Like, if you have to call yourself politically homeless, political homelessness is the last stage that occurs before you just embrace the fact that you've completely flip-flopped in your political journey. Like, I don't know, I don't have a good I don't have a good political party that supports my particular brand of socialism, but like I wouldn't describe myself as politically homeless. You describe yourself as politically homeless when you're in the process of switching from liberal to conservative.
And both in pathology and in policy, I feel that they've taken on some of the characteristics that were indicative of like the Bush era Republicans.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I've been asking myself, what happened? How did we get here?
Mm-hmm.
And I really do think that Donald Trump specifically just kind of came in, stirred the pot, realigned things in some.
True, Jazz Dog. A much better metaphor and a much funnier one would be to describe it as politically between jobs. Which is kind of, I feel like what's happening here is she's kind of shopping herself around to these conservative networks. That's my impression now, especially in the wake of like her take existing.
Some ways. So for instance, he was such a disruptive force that the left in general just really didn't know how to react or respond to him. And I think that the mainstream Democratic Party has kind of taken on the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Mm-hmm.
And so suddenly the neoconservatives, the Bush era Republicans, the so-called never Trumpers,
mm-hmm.
were welcomed into the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing made that clearer than Kamala Harris, saying that she was honored by Dick Cheney's endorsement. I was like, oh my God.
Welcomed in right at the top. Not like, okay, but don't tell anyone, but like right in the front door.
I mean, if I were a Democratic candidate and I had the endorsement of Dick Cheney, I'd be like, keep it cool. Keep it cool. Don't say that. Like, just let's keep it between us. Also, what am I doing wrong in how I'm campaigning to attract the likes of Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney? So I think the biggest mistake the Democratic Party has made in recent years is this mistaken thinking that if someone or a political ideology is against Trump, that must mean they're good for the Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
They're not good for the Democrats.
Right.
But I don't know if they've learned that lesson yet.
I mean, that's true. Like, those two
Shouldn't
things aren't
she be
aligned.
Asking, what's a girl to do? We clearly need her take.
What's a girl to do?
Is anyone sort of on their way to learning that lesson, do you think? I mean, Gavin Newsom is now like a podcast bro, which is signaling all by itself, right? And we can have a whole sort
this guy loves the Newsom cast.
Sort of trying to unpack whatever that is. But he's one guy who seems to have some sort of recognition. And it's interesting to me because, people look at California as kind of the petri dish of the left or whatever. But so much of what MAGA is, and so much of just, individual people who are responsible for going from it's the Bush's party to it's Trump
Hey,
party,
Gilbertus Maximus,
are all Southern Californians, So like the scene in California is more than meets the eye. And so much of MAGA came from SoCal. And I'm sure that this is not lost on Gavin, especially because of sort of Kim and kind of the whole whatever that is, which is another conversation.
Yep.
What do you make of sort of Newsom and kind of the broader California scene? Is this where that kind of wake up call is going to come from?
Well, before I comment on the broader California scene, let me just say Gavin Newsom is a snake, and he is setting himself up for a presidential run. And as a result, he's kind of presenting himself as like some sort of reasonable, more moderate Democrat. He is someone that you shouldn't trust or believe. I mean,
the issue that Anna's running into here is that I think she likes Gavin Newsom's positioning, but unfortunately, personally despises Gavin Newsom from like, him being governor. And so like, I think she runs into an issue here where she's like, well, he says the most wonderful things, but you can't trust him, even when he's saying like the literal worst shit.
I've seen what his leadership was like when he was, a political leader in San Francisco. Now
Right.
he's the governor of California. And he has overseen the absolute destruction of the state that I was born and raised in, the state that I absolutely love. He shuttered 4 state prisons, released inmates, including those who have committed violent crimes, into society with no plan for them, no transition for them. Where do you think they ended up? I mean, he released tens of...
Wait, where did they end up? I would actually love to see some data on that.
thousands of inmates during COVID because of, the prison system being too crowded. The idea was, well, we need to protect them. We don't want this virus to spread in these tightly packed prison cells, which is an understandable thing to want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to have a plan. Mm-hmm. And so he just released tens of thousands of inmates in a state that just underwent a shutdown. No businesses are open. There are no job opportunities. There's no housing. Where do you think they ended up? And then you want to tell me that there hasn't been a crime spike, please. Yeah. So all of these things, I think, have woken up some Californians. And it was...
the wild thing is that there hasn't been a crime spike. Like, if you actually look at the data, which we have multiple times on this issue, there hasn't been a crime spike. Crime has been going down, like, across the board for the last 2 years.
Reflected in the election results. For instance, Los Angeles County voted 11% more Republican in this election cycle compared to the previous presidential election cycle. And so that tells you something. That tells you that voters, even in the bluest state, in the bluest city, are waking up to how some of these policies have actually failed them. And they want the economic policies that the Democratic Party historically purported to want to protect. But what they're getting instead is all these social changes that have diminished their quality of life.
Yeah.
Which social changes? Well, I'm very curious. Which social changes are diminishing the quality of life in California? Again, notice how there's just so much vagueness. The vagaries just kind of accumulate. And I would love to hear some specifics. It's weird how they seemingly just kind of, they get close to what they're talking about, then retreat. It's like they're afraid to say what they think.
Yeah. I mean, there's no argument. You're an Angelino. I spent the better part of 25 years in that city. It's worse than it's ever been in its history. Yeah. Just overall, which is shocking in its own.
How is that? How can that possibly be true? There have been times in California history where an earthquake could knock down an entire city because they didn't have building codes. What are you talking about, man?
Right. San Francisco, that's been beaten to death. We've all seen the poop map. It's there's no end in sight to any of this. And so
wait, we have a perfectly reasonable solution to that. How's the homeless? How's the homeless? Allow them to use bathrooms. Build facilities so that they can take a shit in peace.
So you have to ask yourself, why? This is a guy, Newsom, 2 terms lieutenant governor, 2 terms governor, podcast bro, still presenting himself as someone who deserves public attention and who ought to be listened to, and who in some way is more kind of savvy or dialed in than the average Democrat.
Poop map. I believe the poop map is this app that people used in order to track the location of just different poops on the street in LA. I don't know. All I'm saying is if people don't poop on the street under normal circumstances, if they are given an option, they will poop in a toilet. And so I think framing the problem of people pooping on the street as oh, well, it's because of it's because these people exist and they're inconvenient. No, the issue is that society has been constructed in a way that denies them bathroom usage.
Democrat right now, low bar, granted.
Yeah.
But why then, if he still wants to play at the top of the game, why govern in the way that he did? Was he actually governing? Was it mostly just letting bad things happen? I mean, how does he expect to run to convert that record into some kind of future?
Well, I think that Gavin Newsom is the perfect example of a politician who wants to be a leader but doesn't have the characteristics necessary to actually be a leader. Gavin Newsom follows trends, and he goes along with what he thinks is politically popular at any given.
Archangel, no, I don't think advanced turtle logic is. I don't think they're being serious about when they say toilets don't grow on trees. I believe in the toilet tree.
Given moment. And so when the BLM movement happened, when there were calls for criminal justice reform, he didn't think about it. He didn't implement policies in a carefully considered way. He just went along with what he thought would be popular or what the activists in the state, who are not representative of the general public, were demanding. And that's the thing that's so frustrating about politics in California. The people who lead the political scene in California are not the politicians. They're the activist groups and they're the nonprofits.
So you're saying it's the it's people who've dedicated their time to raising awareness of various issues. And non-profits. I'm gonna ask a couple of questions here, but how is that more powerful than like multi-billion-dollar companies lobbying the state? Like how on earth is like billions of dollars can get you a lot in America? It can buy you the goddamn presidency. But if we're talking about if we're talking about nonprofits, I would also just ask, where do nonprofits get most of their money from? Can anyone take a guess? Can anyone want to take a guess where nonprofits get the majority of their funds from? Anyone? Bueller? The public? Donations from people! But not just donations from people. They can also get donations from companies. So if the nonprofits are taking over the state, wouldn't that really be an extension of corporate or oligarchic power? See what I mean there? Like the Bill Gates Foundation is effectively a front for Bill Gates. He funnels billions of dollars into the Bill Gates Foundation. And like it goes and it does things. It kind of prepares the way for his company to move in and thrive in different areas. Like that's what corporate or billionaire nonprofits do and are designed to do. And so like, oh man, the nonprofits, it's the same people behind like the corporate donations. It's the same people behind the nonprofits.
And they're the loudest. They seem to have a lot of time on their hands. They'll be at every single city council meeting. They will,
Also, this is an excellent example of why you should go to city council meetings. It pisses people who want more corporate power in politics. It pisses them off. You should go to more city council meetings.
Harass the crap out of these politicians until they get their way, until they get what they want.
Yes, that is in fact how political pressure works from the public.
In order to survive in a state as expensive as California, you got to be working constantly, as I am.
Unless, I guess you're an activist, in which case somehow you lose the need to have money.
I don't have the luxury of showing up to a city council meeting and having my voice heard. And it's incredibly frustrating when...
I mean, neither do the people who show up at the city council meetings, but they do it anyway.
The vast majority of the population doesn't really have a voice in our local politics, but self-interested activist groups do. And by definition, whatever the activist groups are representing is some niche policy that most of the voters in California are not going to be in favor of.
I just, the idea that like, oh, none of these activists have a job. They're bleeding hearts who have all the time in the world. They don't even need to eat or drink. They're basically inhuman. It's crazy,
And you're starting to see some of that backlash now. But I think what you're also noticing in California, and honestly with the American electorate in general, is the biggest demographic of voters are non-voters. People who have basically given up on our political system altogether, don't believe that a politician from either side of the political aisle is going to serve their best interests. That's a really big problem.
You look at the activists, you look at the, NGOs or nonprofits, whatever you want to call them.
It's crazy to like point out like most people are non-voters, but then be angry about people who are actually politically engaged. Like, do you want people to be politically engaged, or do you not want them to be? Make up your mind. Like you can't on the one hand be like, oh, well, these, most people are politically unengaged, but on the other hand, these politically engaged people suck. Like you can't do that. Pick a lane.
Obviously a huge villain for guys on the right. And they look at these things, they're like, these people cannot wield this kind of influence unless they're just being quietly, lavishly funded by, whether it's Soros bucks or USAID or whatever. What's the story there? How is it that they've been able to be such a prominent, force in California politics and really have a chokehold on politicians? A guy like Gavin Newsom, you're like, okay, sort of like white guy.
Yeah, definitely. The activists have a chokehold on Gavin Newsom. Yeah, the far left activists are really, they're twisting Gavin Newsom's arm to get him to dance like a puppet in the palm of their hands. The activists. Next, they're gonna start talking about how the activists are hypnotizing like the goddamn children or some shit. Like it's gonna start getting weirder and more specifically anti-Semitic.
He's got to kind of find a way to not seem so much like a white guy in that kind of environment, but it goes beyond that, right?
I think it goes beyond that. I mean, I think that there is a pretty big scam taking place right now when it comes to these NGOs, particularly in a state like California. So I just recently published a pretty lengthy investigative report on something called behested payments in California. And basically, obviously you have campaign finance laws. So in California, there are private companies that receive grants or contracts from local government or state government. They are not allowed to, contribute funds or campaign contributions to politicians, knowing that if those politicians get elected into office, it's likely that they're going to renew the current contracts that these private businesses are enjoying, obviously funded by taxpayer money. But there's this loophole. And what politicians can do once they're elected in California is they can essentially raise unlimited, almost completely unregulated sums of money through a nonprofit that they themselves control. And I mean, they get to do pretty much whatever they want with that money.
Yeah, that's pretty shitty. I agree. That's bad.
Now, there's always a cover story, right? They're raising money for some project that they have in their agenda. And sometimes the money does actually go to that project. But what it's really about is taking that fundraised money and then funneling it to other nonprofits that are supposed to carry out, certain policy goals or part of the agenda that this office holder has. But then you look at the financial disclosures for these NGOs and these nonprofits, and you realize, it turns out this public-private partnership is just a total scam.
Well, so just real quick, if it's a public-private partnership, it's not. My understanding is that a public-private partnership is not done with a nonprofit. Usually, it's a for-profit company. That's why it's a private company. That being said, this is a problem. There is a problem with corporate corruption, corporate capture, all that jazz, right? Like, there is an issue there, and that's why anytime someone pitches the idea of a public-private partnership, I am immediately suspicious, because it's effectively saying, well, you can skim some money off the top by doing something that the government should probably just do itself. So that being said, aside from that agreement, I'm not entirely sure how you come to the conclusion that the nonprofits are the ones behind the biggest scams against the state and not the literal corporations, the literal billion-dollar corporations,
Ask
holy
Cuomo.
shit.
His office was full of public-private partnerships.
Hey, let's go.
And they're spending a minuscule percentage of the grants that they received from taxpayer money on what the policy or agenda is really supposed to be about. You look at the salaries, though, of all the individuals working at these NGOs, and you get a better sense of where this money's actually going.
Yeah.
That's how you have a situation in which you spend, nearly $25 billion over the course of 5 years on homelessness, and the problem becomes 37% worse. Mm-hmm. It's because the nonprofits who have been given that money, first of all, squandered it. There was no real tracking mechanism to ensure that there was no waste or fraud.
I'll also agree here that this is true. This is bad, in fact. But I will say that the reason it was bad, the reason it was wasted, the reason all of those things existed was because it was torpedoed by neoliberal leadership. It was torpedoed by means testing. It was torpedoed by the fact that instead of the state doing it, we, subcontracted and sublet it out to, these NGOs or sometimes for-profit corporations. And turns out that all makes it suck ass,
Odd of that money. And then at the same time, it's just not going to where it's supposed to go. It's building careers for the people who work at these nonprofits, but that's about it.
Yeah. Well, and this is how we get to the point where something like DOGE comes along, where it's like, okay, it's going to be, 20 guys in a room just kind of combing through everything from the top, because we've had 20, 25 years plus of this kind of scam economy.
I know.
Where a handful of people at the top have just been...
Yeah, because DOGE is a totally reasonable reaction to any of these problems and will definitely solve them. No, it's not going to solve any of these problems. It actively has made things worse.
Really eating the seed corn, just scooping out the inner workings of a society. This is beyond sort of like capitalism versus socialism. This is just a group of people who are just sort of harvesting all of the value.
It's not beyond capitalism or socialism. It's just capitalism. These people are dumb as fuck. This terrible abuse perpetrated and incentivized by capitalism couldn't possibly be capitalism's fault. It must secretly be something else that is just a natural extension of capitalist behavior. It's not like we used to send orphans into the factory in order to earn their keep in the workhouse under capitalism. It's not like literally the worst excesses of humanity occurred due to the profit motive. No. It's clearly a new thing that we've never thought of before.
Out of the political economy and hiding it, or I don't know what happens to it. You look at something like BLM, it was a glaring example where the founders of BLM are buying houses in Topanga or whatever,
right.
Half of them.
Patrisse Cullors.
Yes,
bought
thank you.
4 separate houses. 2020, BLM received $93 million in donations. Mm-hmm. So you have the national chapter, mm-hmm. of which at the time, Patrisse Cullors is one of the heads of the national chapter. But then you have the local chapters who are expecting a cut of that money. They didn't receive anything. They were complaining. And that's how we found out that, oh, wow, she spent money on these homes. And then she did this nonsense about how, no, the whole point of these mansions is to bring people together and to put out,
That was ridiculous. Though I will say, again, that these examples are, one, from 10 years ago, and 2, that's bad. How does that get us any closer to fixing any of the problems?
I feel like there should be a game show skit called, Is It Capitalism?
Is it capitalism? It's always capitalism! Dun 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 da 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 dun. Sake Tanuki, thank you for the 2 tier 1 subs.
Content, pro-BLM content,
right.
whatever it
Community
was.
organizing.
Yeah, right. It was no such thing happened. It was all lies. And, just going back to your point about DOGE, look, I don't have a rosy outlook on what DOGE is doing. Even though I was very much in favor of actually coming in and with a scalpel, actually rooting out the waste, fraud, and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's been happening. I think that, Elon Musk and DOGE have just essentially did this blanket policy of getting rid of probationary federal workers, regardless of what they do, regardless of how skilled or important they might be. There's this thinking that if you're a probationary worker, well, you're brand new. You're considered a probationary worker if you've been promoted to another position, which means some of the skilled people in the federal government that we need were let go, and it's going to be hard to get some of those folks back. There's waste in the Pentagon.
I do, Jess, I have also wondered if Anna voted for Trump. I have also wondered this. That would have seemed insane, but I'm genuinely maybe.
They haven't passed a single audit, and there hasn't really been a genuine discussion about cutting waste in the Pentagon. That's frustrating.
Right. Not since Rumsfeld got up and said, "Oh, trillions unaccounted for," and then 9/11, shocker. Right?
Yeah. And the other thing is, the vast majority of Americans, including Republican voters, want to protect programs like Social Security. DOGE deciding to fire 7,000 workers at the Social Security Administration leads me to think that they're probably trying to dismantle Social Security without having to do it through Congress.
Yes, 10,000%. That is what they are doing.
And if that happens, I don't know how voters are going to react, but I hope they rage about it, because that's an entitlement program that we're entitled to because we've paid into it.
It's a sticky situation. I know, lots of people who are hoping for the best with this.
Yeah.
But the attitude is like, we never should have gotten in this mess in the first
Agreed.
place.
Yes, I agree.
And we now might have to endure yet another wave of pain and chaos and confusion in order to try to hack our way out. And you sort of back yourself into a corner as a country, and you have to take this kind of Hail Mary in the hopes of just kind of clearing a space where you can begin to understand. I mean, this is what happens when you have...
Except that we were literally in a decent economic position when Trump came into office. Except for that fact.
When you're printing magic money for generations.
Yeah.
When you have a budget
what?
and then an off book.
Oh my God. Did she just nod along to fucking go back to gold standard bullshit? Are you kidding me?
Books budget that's so huge and so corrupt that even the people at the top can't really be sure what's real and what's not anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think that all of this wasteful spending taking place for so long ended up garnering support for the idea of someone coming in and just cutting things like crazy. And this is where I get frustrated with Democrats and the left in general, because they have lately engaged in this weird strategy, if you can call it that, of just deny that it's happening. Mm-hmm. And if you deny that it's happening, maybe voters won't see that it's happening. No, voters see that things are happening. And they see that you're trying to gaslight them and pretend like these very real issues are not occurring. Mm-hmm. And that creates an opening for the right to come in and say, we'll save you.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened with DOGE. Yeah. That's exactly what happened with immigration.
Wait, no, that's not what happened with DOGE. DOGE literally doesn't save anyone. It was never intended to. The messaging around it wasn't even oh, well, it's going to help you in some way. No, it was always about cutting services to people who need it. The DOGE cutting US aid, that wasn't under any, assumption that, it's going to go to helping, poor people in the United States. No. It was just to be cruel. It riled up the base, because cruelty to someone in a position of low power seems like genuine power. Oh, you can be cruel. How powerful you must be in order to get away with it, Again, Jess, we're talking we're going into these areas where it's just vagueness, vague illusion. Just be specific with your words. I hate this, just kind of tiptoeing around the subject.
Okay,
just tackle it.
Well, before the election took place, I did stories about how, look, there is a crisis at the border. I am not anti-immigration. I would like to reform our immigration policies. I would like a pathway to citizenship for the millions of people who have been here for decades, who have contributed to society, who have actually paid taxes, but aren't going to get, things like Social Security in return, even though they're paying into the system. I want a better immigration system. However, it was a lie that there wasn't a crisis at the border under Biden. There was.
What is the source of that crisis? If you're going to say that, elaborate on what the crisis is, right? Okay, so the crisis is what? The chronic underfunding of our border administration, so that we can't process asylum cases. We can't process immigration proceedings fast enough. Okay, well, that's a problem we can solve with more funding. But like what she's doing instead is playing defense for a mass deportation campaign.
And since we weren't able to, track everybody and make sure that we were doing background checks on people coming in, some pretty shady figures came into the country and were causing problems.
Like whom? Some pretty shady figures, like whom? Whomst? Explain.
The communities that were impacted by that deserved a voice, and they weren't getting that voice from the Democratic Party. The Democratic
were impacted by that in what way? You're making all of these vague allusions like, oh, well, crime came in, shady criminals came into the country, and then communities were impacted by that. But like, that's a very, very weirdly vague way of talking about this issue.
The party was just gaslighting the hell out of them and trashing anyone on the left who had the audacity to raise these issues through their own platforms like me. And so either you take these issues seriously and have a seat at the table in finding solutions, or you're going to create a vacuum in which the right is going to take over. And guess what? They took over.
They did. And at the same time, though, I mean, politics is not going to go away.
Right.
Like, I think she's trying to position herself so she can talk about like, oh, well, actually, Tren de Aragua was controlling all of the apartment buildings in Aurora, Colorado. Like, we're going to resurrect this goddamn story again.
There's all endless fear mongering about Donald Trump being not like the others. He's a dictator. This guy is qualitatively different from any president who has ever sat, Oh,
yeah, no. Jazz Dog, that's exactly it. The vagueness gives her plausible deniability. It allows like a conspiracy brained audience to just fill in the blank. 100%. That's exactly why she does it. That's exactly why a lot of these conservatives do it. Because they all get used to a way of talking that's constantly winking, nodding, tapping the side of the nose, being coyly, insert is a certain type of bigotry to their audience or in front of their audience. And like their audience responds to that, unfortunately.
You walked by the way. And it's you look at FDR. I mean, this was a guy who's absolutely sort of flexing what we would call dictatorial muscles. No, I'm packing the court. No, I'm creating these agencies.
Yeah, that's true.
No,
I wonder if this guy is pushing some Curtis Yarvin. Whose basic idea of FDR is that FDR ended democracy, and we've been in a default monarchy ever since.
If I don't get congressional support, I'm going to do it anyway because things got to a point where the foundations of the institutions were just sort of crumbling.
Yeah,
and
that's a great point.
What do you do?
Yeah.
And so even though that was all unfolding, politics still existed. All these kinds of different interest groups and pressure groups, and we do still live in a country where even if you have immense power at the very top, which let's face it, we haven't had in a president for some time, certainly not during Biden. Even with that immense power, there's still this kind of big roiling political situation, and I think we're going to continue to experience that. What I'm starting to hear from the right is kind of this flip of what we would expect on immigration, which is, Zelensky's a bad guy. He's been destroying his own country. It's not these Ukrainian refugees' fault. We can't just send them packing back to Ukraine to be destroyed by the same war machine that it was built, that we didn't want to be built in the first place.
Wow, the right is saying that?
Some people on the right, yeah.
That's excellent.
Wow, the right is saying that? Sure, some people hypothetically might.
And I'm glad that they are.
And it's just, it's people's lived experience, which I know lived experience is sort of like a loaded word or whatever, but people are alive. They have experiences. And when the experiences of people on the right who are anti-Ukraine war from the beginning, anti-intervention, they see the refugees show up. These are people who are, not just going directly to the meth or directly to the gangs, lots of them came to my church. I have lived experience too, and it's reflective of that. It's not fitting into those neat sort of left-right binary categories that have been created for us paradoxically by the Uniparty.
That's such a great point. And for people who are really,
you're not gonna touch the Uniparty, just like the casual insertion of that into the conversation. Okay.
Paying attention, and I mean, I'm not tribal, so I don't feel loyalty to anyone, or like politically speaking. any one political figure or political party. And so that gives me the space to kind of step back and constantly ask myself, okay, well, I've been voting Democrat my entire adult life. Am I happy with where the party is now? Do they represent me? Do I even know what they represent?
Right.
At
That's
this
the big
point?
question. Yeah.
And it's tough, James, because right now I don't have a party that I feel represents me. I'm very left economically speaking.
I wonder where this is going. I wonder where this is going. Very left economically speaking. So are we getting the rare, left-leaning economically, right-leaning socially, the rare combo?
Not so much, though. Like, I'm not really in line with the mainstream Democratic Party these days when it comes to some social issues.
Yeah. You're fiscally liberal, socially conservative. It's crazy. You very rarely see this particular combination.
They're just kind of unreasonable at this point, like on a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. And no, I don't believe in police and prison abolition. I think that's crazy. Mm-hmm. It's never been accomplished in any other country. We're like struggling to even get.
Yeah, but like we could take some decent steps that would make things better, like adopting a prison system, for example, or an incarceration system that prioritizes, reducing rates of recidivism. Like that's, as opposed to like focusing on it as a punishment, we could actually improve prison, make it less of a torturous experience, and set people up for success. When they leave, it could be more rehabilitative. And I think that would be a good direction to move in. I don't know that it would solve all of the problems, but like, I think our goal should be to improve prisons until we like get to a point where we don't really need them anymore. Or at the very least, like improve them to the greatest possible degree so that people coming out of them aren't trying to reoffend,
Get to the Scandinavian model when it comes to criminal justice. What are we talking about here in police abolition? Like those people who had been preaching about those.
Well, there are very different ideas of what prison abolition means, what police abolition means. You'd have to actually like dive down into the theorizing and the different historical examples. I know they exist. I just haven't read those books.
Dumb policy ideas have squandered an opportunity to actually do successful, effective criminal justice reform. So I'm tired of the maximalists on the left. I think that they've destroyed the party when it comes to social issues. And then on economic issues, the Democratic Party has destroyed itself by essentially taking corporate money and siding with the corporate interests that fund their campaigns. So what's left for me there?
Is there like a point? Is there an event or a moment that is
left
sort
for
of
you
living
there?
in your head where it was like it?
I don't know. Like maybe you just encountered ideas that were at too high a level. You encountered some high level ideas, and now you're pulling the Dave Rubin. It's actually really impressive for how much she purportedly hated Dave Rubin, how she's mimicking his turn to the right exactly. It's crazy. Like I hope she feels some amount of shame in doing the exact thing she spent years criticizing.
Began to be so over when that happened. Was it Bernie's heart attack?
Same picture,
was it
exactly.
RFK getting kicked out of the party? Like, what was it?
I remember this moment vividly in 2020 when Bernie dropped out of the race. Mm-hmm. And I was upset that he dropped out. I thought he still had a shot, but I think because of COVID and because of the fact that, the mainstream corporate Democrats were rallying around Biden, he just kind of was able to read the tea leaves. And I remember talking to my good friend at the time, the late, great Michael Brooks, and he's like, things are going to get really bad. And I didn't realize how bad things were going to get. But yeah.
I never knew Michael, but like I'm not going to make assumptions about how he'd feel, but I feel pretty gross. I feel pretty gross seeing that.
Things got really bad, but I think that was probably the moment when, for people like me, hope was lost with the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. I mean, they fought Bernie Sanders. You think Democrats fight Donald Trump aggressively? Please. Yeah. I mean, you want to see an effective Democratic Party and basically destroying someone's political career? Look at how they responded to Bernie doing well, in the primaries in 2020. Like, they'll do anything. I mean, they'll even drop out early on to rally around Biden to ensure that a typical, moderate Democrat, corporate Democrat gets voted in.
I know he blamed it on the heart attack. Do you think there's something more nefarious going on there, that they forced him out in some way?
I just think Bernie, having experienced what happened in 2016, knew that his colleagues on the left side of the political aisle weren't going to let it happen.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, people will ask me, would you ever run for office? It's a dirty game. It really is. And I get upset.
Come on, LA mayor, like the doors are wide open.
I don't.
Please no. I can't handle that. I can't handle that right now. I mean, it'd be good, but like, please no. please don't. I don't need that on my plate right now.
No. I just think for those who were fortunate enough to get elected despite how gross our elections are, how could you not want to do right by your voters and actually do good things for them?
Yeah.
I don't get it. I really don't. Don't you care about looking at the world around you, the community around you, the community that you decided to run in order to serve? Don't you want to see them thriving? And it just shocks me when you see someone like Karen Bass, for instance, in LA, engage in the policies that have failed over several years, continue to bolster those policies, support those policies, lie to the American people, lie to Angelenos about how she didn't cut the fire budget ahead of the disastrous wildfires we just experienced.
I will say, California politicians are pretty shit.
We can see the documentation, homegirl. You cut the operational budget by $17 million. And a day before the fires, City Hall sent the Los Angeles Fire Department a memo indicating that they wanted to cut another $46 million from the budget, and they were looking to shutter 16 fire stations. I see how much money she's spending on these nonprofits who are not using the money to help the homeless. How are you going to justify the high taxes in our city and state, take all that money, funnel it to these NGOs, and tell us that you don't have money for the fire budget? I'm sick of it. I'm so sick of it. I can't take it.
Yeah, the waste is definitely going to like ending homelessness and not in any other direction like corporate welfare, corporate tax carve-outs
anymore.
It's disturbing, and what's insane to me is like, the tech guys get scapegoated a lot as being the ones who are like, we're going to build this secret utopia and it's going to be off stage and we're just going to sort of like suck value out of you people and take it over to our little utopia, and one day we're going to get in our little UFOs and we're going to fly out there and you're never going to see, right? And it's like, you don't need to be a tech mogul in order for that to be your master plan, because we've seen it play out over the Biden years, where the people at the top of the establishment have done exactly that. The Karen Basses, the Gavin Newsoms, they've done exactly that without having to found any tech companies, right? And so,
what are you talking about, dude? What in what way is this similar to a tech CEO using a UFO to scoop up people? Like what?
So there are folks who look at Karen Bass, just to stick with that example, and they're like, she's just evil, stupid and evil. There's no other explanation. You got to name it when you see it. Okay, but what's the motivation? Yeah. And it's like, you got the scales here. And on one side,
it's money. It is money.
Side of the scale, you've got basic public welfare, the basic common good.
Right.
Do you walk down the streets of your city? How does it look? Are people thriving, or are they struggling and dying and, going to a very dark place? And so that's on one end. And on the other end is something that's off stage that we don't get to see. How much money is it? How many offshore bank accounts is it? What is the payoff for so many of these policymakers and politicians that is causing them to go like, oh, well, I really don't want to impose destitution and misery on my own people, but the payoff is just too good. What is that?
Bribery is baked into our political system.
It's bribery. It's the exchange of favors. It is political corruption. It is the rampant spread of lobbying as an accepted tactic in our political system. It is all downstream of Citizens United.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court has legalized political bribes. But it's even worse than that when you look at Congress and what motivates them. It's not just money in politics. It's the fact that they are free to engage in insider trading based on briefings that we're not privy to, the general public is not privy to, and they're able to make stock trades, individual stock trades based on those closed-door briefings.
Yeah.
They don't get prosecuted for it. There's barely any regulation or oversight of it. They have to, do financial disclosures of their investments, but they're kind of vague in terms of like the dollar amount, right? It's like a giant, it's based on monetary categories as opposed to like exact dollar amounts that they're, contributing to stocks.
Do I think techno-feudalism is inevitable? No.
And even if they're not doing insider trading, if you are a member of Congress and you're free to trade individual stocks, well, you're literally...
I agree. We should outlaw this practice, by the way. Like, insider trading should be prosecuted. That should be there should be legal consequences for that. But we need to go far beyond that. We need to go to a constitutional amendment to make sure that lobbying is severely curtailed, if not outright eliminated.
Literally invested in companies that you're going to be making regulatory decisions about.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
So that corruption's a huge issue. And it's created a system where all the incentives are for the politicians to be corrupt, right? To look out for themselves as opposed to their constituency, the people who voted them into these positions of power.
And those who are able to stand up and call foul on this stuff, you almost have to be like a freak and like an ostracized figure. I mean, I went to DC. I did a little mini doc on.
Can we maybe examine for a minute? What they're putting out there is that oh yeah, your local mom and pop store is buying the ear of your city's mayor, and they have just as much power as their activist child who shows up to city council meetings. And then you have the oligarch that's worth approximately $256 billion. All of them exert the same amount of pressure on society. It's like watching a portal into a bizarro world,
On just this, filthy rich, got Matt Gaetz, who at that point was still in Congress, and hugely polarizing figure on the right and the left sometimes, depending on who you ask. But we're walking up and down the halls of Congress, and he's like, "They came at me. I survived. I have nothing to lose. I'm taking you to every office of the prime offenders on, can't really call it insider trading. The rules are a little squishy, but you can look at the printouts. Unusual Whales and other guys have sort of tallied this stuff." And just went to their offices, and we did a little stand up in front of each of them, and he called them out. And you have to be sort of a fringy person because the center is so corrupt.
Yeah, definitely. I was listening to a recent podcast. Oh yeah, so I don't know why I was compelled to listen to this, but it was Adam Carolla and Matt Gaetz kind of interviewing each.
Okay, I think we're done. I think we're done. I don't want to listen to her story about Adam Carolla and Matt Gaetz doing a fun interview with each other. That sounds so cursed. It does sound extraordinarily cursed. Let's listen to this interview with a washed-up comedian who is never that funny, and a child sex trafficker. Clearly, that'll be successful. That'll be great. Good content.
Does anyone really believe Nancy Pelosi has beat the S&P 500 by an average of 15% because she's brilliant?
Absolutely not. It's because they all do insider trading. They all absolutely do insider trading, Hi. But Ryan, thank you for the 10 euros, I believe. Appreciate it. But Jack, if you throw a baseball out into space, it has gravity too, just like Jupiter. These exertions of force are exactly the same. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, this was depressing as hell, and genuinely, I don't think I can watch another second of this. It was that was truly awful. That was I think it made all of us feel like that. It made us feel sad and bad and mad. So anyway, that's what Anna Kasparian's up to. She's left the left. I know I keep saying it, but every time we come back to this topic, she's left the left even harder this time. Good riddance. Let's keep it that way. I guess. Bye.
Riverboat Jack is coming to town. All the viewers gather round. Twitch and YouTube is where she streams. All that content is bursting the scenes. Politics, gaming, and plenty more. Her sense of fashion you'll adore. So grab your stuff and hop aboard. We're going straight to Jack's Discord. Riverboat Jack.